But now I want to take you to some stuff about Canada, and I think it's going to blow your mind. So let's have a look at this. So there's this really great tool, Stats Canada, okay, and I'll provide the link so that you can go here and you can do the things that I'm about to show you, okay, because I really think this is going to blow your mind a little bit, okay, but you can go here and you can have a look at what death counts look like weekly in Canada using this tool. Okay, so when you arrive at this website, okay, and you can see this graph, and each color line represents a different year. Okay, so you can see these represent weekly deaths in Canada. Okay, all ages and both sexes. Okay, so each line representing a different year. You can sort of see the legends down below. 2014 is blue, 2015 is orange, okay, and so on. 2020 being the black dotted line. Okay, so you can see that in Canada, you can clearly see the irregularity. Okay, you can see that somewhere around March, the deaths started to climb, and they kind of peaked up in April, and then they started to come down, although they were still much higher than normal. Okay, so it is very clear from this graph that something abnormal happened at that time. Okay, and it's most likely this virus. Okay, we got hit with the virus around this time, and people who were unprepared, and we didn't know quite how to treat people with this, and so we had a number of deaths. Okay, so you can see that very clearly here. Now you can see very clearly on this graph, okay, in our country, that right around the end of May, the panic is over. Okay, from that point on, we're not seeing anything abnormal happen. Okay, from end of May, we're back into very normal death as compared to all the other years, as you can see from the cluster of lines. Okay, and in fact, if you have a look, once we get to about September, I mean, look what's going on. We're seeing the 2020 deaths plummet. Okay, it's come down so low that it is the lowest death count weekly in our country's recent history. Okay, that's September of this year in Canada. Okay, so understand, have a look around right now. Okay, I understand that this line ends in September, okay, and so we don't have the data yet for October, November, and December. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see how those numbers look, okay, but here we're seeing a downswing that in September we're at the lowest we've been in years. And we are adding restrictions, and we're doing mask mandates, and we're doing all these things, and ever since then it's been continuously more tight restrictions. Now, there's something else here that I think is worth noting, okay? Because if we look at 2020's peak here in April, we're at above 6,500 deaths in a week, okay? So that's high, okay? And it is. You can see the abnormality on this graph, okay? That's high. But look at this purple line at the far top left, okay? Purple, if we look at our legend, that's 2018. In 2018, we had deaths in the 6,500 and up in January. Okay? So what was going on there? And how come nobody was panicking there? See, you have to understand something. The media was not covering this. They were not telling you every day of your life, every hour of the day, that there was something super deadly out there happening. Okay, so you had no idea. You had no idea that there was anything killing people in January of 2018, so you weren't scared. You'd never even know that there was anything out there killing all these people because the news didn't cover it. But it was there, it happened, and we got through it. Okay, and it's not just there. Even that red line in the top left, red line is 2017 in January. It's, halfway between 6,000 and 6,500. Okay, even if you come to the very far right side of this graph, so end of December on the blue line, which is 2016, we're above 6,000, reaching 6,500 almost. Okay, so these numbers have happened before. We've had these great rises in death, and we never made a big news story out of it, never created this mass hysteria about it. And if I didn't show you this graph, you'd never know that there were deaths happening in a week that were comparable to the absolute peak of death in 2020 surrounding COVID-19. So a cool thing about this tool that you can do is you can actually adjust for different criteria. Okay, so as you can see here, now I've changed the graph and I've changed it to only people who are 85 years old and over. Okay, so this is obviously our most vulnerable demographic. So I wanted to kind of see what that would look like. And as you can see, the graph is very similar. Okay, so when we're talking about strictly our danger zone, population, 85 years and older, we get a very similar look. We have this kind of abnormal high in April where it comes up, but then it comes down. And even as we get down to September here, we start approaching very peak low death. Okay, and then we can see that, in things like January of 2018, the height of death was very comparable to the height of death here in 2020. So a lot of the same things we're seeing by just toggling to 85 years and over. Now, watch what happens when I change the age at time of death to be in the demographic of 45 to 64 years old. Watch what happens. Now look how different this graph looks all of a sudden. Now, the one thing that is consistent with the other graphs is that we see the death rate drop dramatically once we get to August and September again, okay? But in this demographic across Canada, 45 to 64 years old, this has not been an abnormal year, okay? You can see that it's got some ups and downs, but nothing out of the ordinary. Okay, if you didn't know about COVID-19, if that was never brought to your attention, then you just looked at this graph, the only thing that would be out of place would be the huge drop in 2020 in August and September. But there's nothing about this graph that shows an overwhelmingly bizarrely high amount of death in 2020. Okay, and 45 to 64 years old is still... it's not old, but it's in a higher category. Certainly at the high end of that, 64 years old is not young anymore. Okay, and we're not seeing anything out of the ordinary. And you have people from 45 to 64 years old that are still working, that are still trying to earn a living, that are still trying to provide for their families and their loved ones. Okay, and so these are the people that are having to suffer through lockdowns. These are the ones who are having to compromise and that are losing their wealth, they're losing their livelihood. Okay, and these are not the people who are gaining anything from this because they're not dying in any sort of strange way, as you can see by this graph. It's another way that you can change the criteria on graphing this is you can change the geography. You can look at this by province. Okay, so here I've brought up Quebec. Okay, Quebec got hit pretty hard early on with this, and so we can see a similar graph again. Okay, so we get this abnormal spike in March and April, but then from June onwards there's really nothing out of the ordinary happening. Okay, from really end of May to early June onwards, we're in a normal place. Okay, but Quebec has had some of the earliest and most draconian measures since then. Okay, but there's nothing in this graph in the deaths that's showing me that this is necessary. Okay, we are in a very normal place here in Quebec. So in this graph, we're looking at Ontario. Okay, this is where Emperor Crazy Doug Ford runs the show. Okay, so we see again in March and April we have that abnormal spike. Okay, so this is obviously getting hit with the coronavirus. Okay, but then come late May, that we're in a place where we're back to normal. Okay, back to normal. And as you can see in this graph, I mean, my goodness, crazy Doug Ford here, just losing his mind. Okay, he's arresting Adam Skelly from Adamson Barbecue because guy wants to open his damn restaurant. Okay, look at this graph. Look at it. Okay, you get down to not even August. We're still in July, and he's already having record lows of death in his province. Okay, this is Ontario. Look how low it is by the time we get to September. I mean, it's crazy how safe this province is. And yet they are acting like they gotta send in the military to stop people from living. It's unbelievable. All right, let's have a look at Alberta. So this is where I live. And I think it's actually really interesting what's going on in this province. Okay, so here, this graph looks kind of different. Okay, you can see that in February, March, kind of where you would expect that the COVID virus would have hit. It is a little bit higher, and it's kind of plateaus for a little while over there. So that kind of makes sense, okay? You can see that it's a little higher than the rest of the years, and it doesn't go up and down. But you'll notice that for Alberta here, the highest death count is not even in 2020. Okay, it's in 2018. In early January of 2018 is the highest weekly death we've seen in this province in recent memory. Okay, and that 2020 does have some high points. Okay, that's for sure. You can see that as you come later on into say June, July, August, that it is not obscenely high, but it is higher a little bit than what we would have seen in previous years. Okay, which is interesting to me. You'll also notice that if you go back to January of this year, that's where the actual highest point of death was for Alberta. So, we're told that we did not get really any cases here until I think February or March, where we started to actually see cases of COVID-19 in Alberta. So what was that? What's happening in January where we have that's the highest point of death that we've seen this year? Did we already start getting the virus, or was that something else that was going on there? We don't know. Okay, but I do find that kind of interesting. Okay, so in this chart, we're still in Alberta, okay? But now I'm going to start looking at different age groups, okay? Because I think you're going to start to see how interesting this gets. Okay, so still in Alberta here. And we can see the spike in February, March, and into April even, let's say, with the 85 years and older group. Okay, this is what we're looking at with this chart, 85 years and oldest. That's our most vulnerable demographic, right? Our oldest people. And we can see clearly that in that time period that things were at their highest for 2020. But outside of that, and even if you include that, there's nothing obscenely crazy going on here in 2020 for our most vulnerable people. Okay, in fact, you'll see that there are many other points looking at this graph that people who are 85 years and older have had the same or worse weekly deaths. Okay, we go in 2018, the purple line right at the beginning on the left-hand side in January is very high, okay, compared to anything we've seen in 2020. We can go on the far right in the red line, 2017, and all the way up. Okay, you can also see this brown line, which is 2019, on around October in the 41, 42, 43, 44 weeks, where it's very high over there as well. Okay, so we can see looking at this that although we had some, high death in 2020 during March, that really, if you look at this chart, you wouldn't really see anything that's looked abnormal or out of place. So if there is death happening a little bit higher this year in Alberta, and it's not really showing in the 85 years and over age group, then where is it? So let's have a look. Okay, so now I've dropped it down to 45 to 64 years old, okay? And still, we look at this graph, and there's something abnormal happening here, okay? You can see that while there have been a couple spikes in 2020 around end of May and end of August, they were very short-lived. They're just these quick spikes. They're nothing super out of the ordinary. We've also seen spikes that high in the orange line, 2015, around middle July and middle of November. Okay, as well as in 2017, the red line, if you look at kind of beginning of November. Okay, so really, you look at this graph, this is the 45 to 64 years old age group in Alberta. And looking at this, you would not have any clue that there was this scary, dangerous pandemic happening. Okay, everything looks very normal. So let's have a look at the next age group, because I think this is what's going to really open your eyes. Okay, so now I've taken us to 0 to 44 years old. Okay, this chart represents young people. Okay, and so this pisses me off. Okay, and it should piss you off as well. Okay, now we see what's really going on here. We can see in 2020 where the excess death is happening. Okay, you can see it. It's very clear. I don't have to explain it to you, but I'm going to say it anyways. You can see that right around early May onward, there is higher death in Alberta than normal, and it's among the young. Okay, from May onward, we're talking about spring and summer on. In young people, we're seeing death. Okay, so you need to put this into perspective. Okay, we know a couple of things. We know that the peak of death from this virus happened early. We saw it in all the charts. Okay, that in February, March, that's when the virus hit. That's when we were not prepared. That's when we didn't know how to treat it. That's when we made our mistakes. And that's where death happened because of the virus. Okay, but we're looking at 0 to 44 years old. This is young people. We all know that young people are not at risk from this virus. This spike in death from young people is not because of the virus. It's not because of that. Okay, and the timing doesn't work either. We're talking about spring and summer, where the bulk of this death in this age group is happening. So what's happening? Okay, now I don't have a concrete 100% proof of this, but it's common sense. Okay, if we have young people and it's from spring forward, then it has to do with the government response. Okay, it's lockdown, it's depression, it's stuff like that. This is not the virus that's causing the death in Alberta. Okay, this is where I live. This is where people, friends of mine who are going to be watching this video, live. Okay, this is not because of the virus. This is the government. Their response has been absolutely devastating to Albertans. Okay, so here we're seeing a similar thing with BC, okay? BC, you have your spike in March, okay? Like we've seen very consistently, where the virus is doing its damage, okay? And although even here, you can see again, at the top end of death in 2020, in March, is not the highest point on this graph at all, okay? We can see that all the way back in 2017, the red line in January is quite significantly higher than that. Okay, but we did not have the widespread panic that we are having right now. Okay, but anyways, we can see that there's the COVID spike in the early part in March of 2020, and then everything kind of normalizes until about July. And then we can see clearly that 2020's death count is a little higher in July and forward from there, okay, than other years. Now, is this because of the virus? No, it's not. We know this, okay? We know that the COVID deaths spiked early on in March, and then they kind of leveled off. They did. Okay, cases have gone up because of various reasons, okay, that we've talked about before, but COVID deaths have not spiked in July. Okay, so why is there all this extra death in BC? Well, it's not because of the virus. Okay, it's because of the government response, because of lockdown, it's because of depression. We've seen, how many articles have you seen about BC and suicides jumping up over there, and people's mental health? Okay, this is what it is. The virus is not the problem. It's the response, okay? It is the lockdowns. This is what's destroying our lives. And guess what? The long-term effects of this are going to be even worse if we don't stop doing this and start turning this around. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that and want to see more, hit that like button and feel free to leave a comment and tell me what you think. This content can be found on BitChute, Parler, Instagram, and YouTube. So please follow, subscribe, and turn post notifications on so that you know when the next post drops. Thanks, and see you soon.